This is Al Jazeera.
Hello, I'm Rob Matheson, and this is the NewsHour live from Doha, coming up in the next 60 minutes.
But I am here to report, when the count is finished, we believe we will be the winners.
Well, 2 days after the U.S. presidential election, there is still no winner. But Democrat nominee Joe Biden says he's very close to victory. And now comes the legal challenge. President Donald Trump sends out a team of lawyers to question votes in several states. And it could all come down to these two races. Vote counting still underway in Georgia and Pennsylvania. Kosovo's president steps down to face a war crimes trial at The Hague for his alleged role during the 1998-99 Serbia conflict.
And in sport, the pressure mounts on Manchester United boss Ole Gunnar Solskjaer. His side has suffered another defeat, this time in the European Champions League.
And we're beginning this news hour as Americans are waking up to another day of uncertainty over who's going to be their next president. It's 10 a.m. on the East Coast in the U.S. state of Georgia. These are live pictures from there where vote counting has been going on through the night. It's an extremely close race in the traditionally Republican state. Donald Trump's initial lead has been steadily falling. Georgia is one of several states where Republicans are filing legal challenges over the election. Let me give you a look at the state of play so far. Joe Biden has already flipped Michigan and Wisconsin. Donald Trump narrowly won those 4 years ago. The Democratic candidate now has a projected total of 264 electoral college votes, while Trump is projected to win 214. Now remember, a candidate needs 270 to win. Here in yellow, you can see the states still being decided. Nevada in the west, of course, and Georgia as well, and North Carolina as well, and in the south and further up, Pennsylvania. Now, as I mentioned, vote counting is still going on in Georgia. Trump leads there by about 18,000 votes. But what might help Joe Biden is that most of the remaining votes are from Atlanta and its suburbs. They lean Democratic. We're expecting more data in the coming hours. Now, we're also still waiting on Pennsylvania, the state where Joe Biden was born. Trump's lead here is again shrinking, and the remaining mail ballots are mostly from the Democratic-leaning cities of Philadelphia and Pittsburgh, giving Biden a chance to catch up. Pennsylvania is another state where Trump is filing a lawsuit. And here is Nevada, where Biden is narrowly in the lead. The western state has 6 electoral votes. That will be enough to get him to the key number of 270. It's one of the states that Trump is suing, claiming voter fraud. Now, we've got a team of correspondents in place across the U.S. Jamal El-Shayal is in Joe Biden's home state of Delaware. Kristen Salumi is outside the Pennsylvania Convention Center. Andy Gallagher is in Florida for us. And Alan Fisher is standing by for us live in Washington, D.C. First, Patty Culhane wraps up the latest developments.
Former Vice President Joe Biden projecting confidence he will be the next president. And he may have taken a step closer. The Associated Press declaring he's won the states of Wisconsin and Michigan, giving him more electoral college votes and an easier path to the 270 that will get him to the White House.
And now, after a long night of counting, it's clear that we're winning enough states to reach 270 electoral votes needed to win the presidency. I'm not here to declare that we've won, but I am here to report that when the count is finished, we believe we will be the winners.
But U.S. President Donald Trump is demanding a recount in Wisconsin after falling short by around 20,000 votes. Even his most ardent supporters doubt that will change anything. Former Wisconsin Governor Scott Walker tweeting out, a recount in 2016, Trump's numbers went up by 131. And the counting continues in the states that will decide the election, with state officials asking for patience.
Give the public servants the opportunity to do their job. And what I will tell you is that here in Pennsylvania, we're going to follow the law, and we will respect the will of the people. And a proper victor will be certified based on who got more votes.
The president is suing to stop the counting in some states. His surrogate saying falsely that the election is being stolen.
To win, for a Republican to win here, how many votes do we have to be ahead? 400,000 is not enough? With 80+% counted, I think there's only 14% of the vote to go. Do you think we're stupid? You think we're fools?
The president is complaining on Twitter. They are finding Biden votes all over the place, in Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, and Michigan. So bad for our country. To be clear, they are not finding ballots, but counting ones that come in on time according to state laws. And there is a question about whether the Postal Service, run by a Trump loyalist, interfered in getting ballots delivered on time, defying a federal judge's order Tuesday to do a sweep for ballots. They refused, potentially leaving hundreds of thousands not counted. The one thing this election has clearly shown, America is a nation divided.
It really does seem like people live in two different realities, given like the news they consume and who they surround themselves with. So I'm not that surprised that a lot of people decided to vote again for a president who's brought us to where we are.
With several cases winding their way through the courts as the votes are counted and America and the world waits to see who eked out a win in this fractured country. Patty Culhane, Al Jazeera.
Okay, let's speak to Alan Fisher. He's joining us live from Washington, D.C., where the president has just tweeted, "Stop the count." Alan, we didn't hear very much from the president or the White House in the last few hours, but it suddenly seems to be ramping up a little bit.
Exactly. We didn't see him at all yesterday. You have to remember that just the fact that he tweeted out "stop the count" shows how confused the message for the Trump campaign is. On one hand, he's saying stop the count, yet his team in Arizona want them to continue the count. And that could be the problem if they go to a judge anywhere in the country and say, "We want you to stop the count." He said, well, in another part of the country, you're saying you want it to continue. Exactly the opposite. If he goes and says, "We want you to continue the count," say, "Hold on a second, weren't you the guy that tweeted out stop the count?" What is also interesting is that Jason Miller, who is one of Donald Trump's closest political advisors, in the last 15 minutes tweeted out a note saying that they had a big win in Pennsylvania. More details to follow. Not long after that, in fact, just in a couple of minutes, Donald Trump has tweeted out that Corey Lewandowski, who was one of his campaign managers during the last campaign, and Pam Bondi, who is one of his legal advisors, they are going to hold a news conference in Pennsylvania probably in 15 minutes. The fact that they're rushing this up quite so far suggests that the Trump campaign thinks that they have won some sort of major victory. We'll obviously get more details on that. We're certainly seeing a flurry of legal action. We knew this was going to happen. Donald Trump talked about how he was going to challenge the results in court if he did not win. He said that that would suggest there was fraud. There are people in the Trump campaign who are saying that they're hearing stories about ballots being found in rivers. Let me just say there's absolutely no evidence of that either. Donald Trump has often said there were problems with the voting system, with the mail-in system, how there was fraud, how foreign actors could get involved, how you could reprint your ballot form. None of those proved to be true either, but they've obviously decided that in some of these cases they're going to go to a judge and argue their case. It's up to the judge whether or not they throw out the case, but Donald Trump has already said he wants to go to the Supreme Court. That would mean appealing it to the next level of court, then to the one after that. Then the Supreme Court has got to decide whether or not they want to take the case on. There's one other thing I want to say, Rob. Before the election, Donald Trump said that come November the 4th, no one would talk about COVID. He insisted that the media were just going on about this. COVID, 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 he said. It's all you hear about. You'll hear nothing about it after November the 4th because he thought it was being used as a political tool to try and defeat his presidency. On Wednesday, the day after the election, there were 100,000 new cases reported of COVID in the United States. That was a record. So all eyes at the moment on Pennsylvania, all eyes on the recount that is going to get underway in Wisconsin, and all eyes on the 6 states where at the moment things are too close to call. I would point out that if Donald Trump was successful and we did stop the count, if they did that right at this very moment, Joe Biden would be the next president of the United States.
Alan, we can't lose sight of the fact as well, this is not just about the presidency, is it? It's also about who's going to control the Senate as well.
That's right, and some of those results are coming in. People were predicting that the Democrats would do very well. They haven't done as well as they would hope. There's still the possibility that they could get a very slight majority in the Senate. If you've got the White House and the Senate, it becomes a lot easier to govern. Donald Trump has found that, but there's still a voting going on in a lot of these key areas as well. But when they lost the likes of Susan Collins in Maine, that the Democrats were very keen, very hopeful of flipping, and that didn't happen. That kind of suggested that their efforts and the money they'd spent in these efforts had all been a bit in vain.
Alan, thanks very much indeed. That's Alan Fisher bringing us up to date from Washington, D.C. Okay, Georgia's become the unexpected toss-up for Donald Trump, with Joe Biden closing in on his lead. For more on this, let's speak to Andy Gallagher. He's joining us live from Miami. Andy, the numbers really are being crunched there in Georgia, aren't they? And how close are we to getting a result?
Well, on election night, Donald Trump had a lead of about 372,000 votes. And over the last 48 hours, I'm starting to forget what day it is at the moment, that lead's been eaten down to about 18,500, with about 60 or so thousand votes to be still counted. So it is within that margin of error. In the state of Georgia, if it's within 0.5%, either candidate can ask for a recount. But these poll workers have been working all night with these final 60,000 mail-in ballots, but it's where they're from that's really key for the Biden campaign. They're from the suburbs of Atlanta, and if you look at the counties neighboring the ones where the ones are being counted now, they've overwhelmingly gone for Joe Biden. Now, the state of Georgia shouldn't really have even been in play. A Democratic presidential nominee has not won that state since 1992. That was Bill Clinton. So this is an extremely tight race, a very important race with those 16 electoral college votes, but state officials saying they could well go into a recount, which under Georgia law needs to happen within 2 business days. But this is razor thin at the moment. But as I said, those final mail-in ballots, which are being counted at about 3,000 an hour, are from majority Democratic areas. So it may well swing in Joe Biden's favor, but that margin may be the all-important thing, which could see that state going into another recount.
Andy, thanks very much indeed. We'll be keeping our eyes across that. Of course, we are expecting some sort of movement on that in the next few hours or so. Let's speak to Kristen Salumi. She's outside the Philadelphia Convention Center. Where do things stand with the vote count there, Kristen?
Well, Joe Biden is inching closer and closer to President Trump as the vote count continues. The lead of President Trump is now under 165,000 votes, and with just under 800,000 votes left to count, Joe Biden is very much in striking distance, especially considering that he has been steadily gaining on President Trump as these mail-in ballots are counted, and many of the ones that are left are in urban areas like here in Philadelphia, which lean heavily Democratic. At this rate, most of the ballots could be counted today. Remember that we do have that lawsuit outstanding, President Trump attempting to get the Supreme Court to weigh in on a decision here in Pennsylvania to allow mail-in ballots to be counted, even if they're received after Election Day, as long as they are postmarked by Election Day and received by Friday. The state decided to count them, and the state Supreme Court here upheld that decision. But President Trump, among other legal actions here in Pennsylvania, asking the Supreme Court to get involved, and we do expect the Trump team to be speaking to reporters in this area very, very soon, so we may have an update on legal actions by them very soon. I should say that while the Trump campaign is arguing that Pennsylvania has been attempting to disenfranchise voters, the Pennsylvania officials have been pushing back on that strongly. Governor Tom Wolf, speaking earlier today, said that things are going slowly but steadily. They are counting the ballots. It takes time. That requires patience. He says that the election so far has gone off without a hitch. And in his words, math is math.
Kristen, thank you very much indeed. That's Kristen Salumi talking to us from outside the Philadelphia Convention Center, where, as Kristen mentioned, we are expecting some sort of press conference possibly from the Trump campaign, possibly in the next few minutes. If we get it, we will, of course, bring it to you. Let's cross to Jamal El-Shayal. He's live for us in Wilmington in Delaware. That's, of course, Joe Biden's home state. What's been the reaction from the Democrats, Jamal, to all these accusations of voting irregularities and the legal action that the Trump campaign is bringing?
Well, essentially, they've dismissed all those accusations. They see it as just some attempt to discredit the democratic process. Obviously, from a legal perspective, they are well prepared. They're also well funded to be able to put up any legal representation in any of the states that are being contested. But it's not just a reaction from the Biden campaign with regards to these accusations. There's been a statement that's come out also from the Organization for Security and Cooperation in Europe, the OSCE. This is an organization, Rob, that sends election monitors around the world whenever there are votes. And our viewers and journalists alike will be accustomed to hearing from them in less established, let's say, democracies, not necessarily, or I can't remember hearing from them over a US election, but they've come out and they've said that Trump's claims of voter irregularities are, quote, baseless and harm public trust in the democratic institutions. So this is an independent electoral observing body which has also dismissed Trump's claims. What Biden's camp has been saying throughout this is that people need to be patient, they need to wait. They point to the fact that for the first time in U.S. history, more than 100 million people have either voted early or via post, and that by default was going to make the vote sifting process a lot longer. As we were speaking just now, Trump tweeted again, by the way, Rob, saying that no vote, in capital letters, no vote that has arrived after Election Day will be counted. Obviously, he doesn't have the power to make that decision. And what many people are saying, particularly with regards to Americans living abroad, particularly those serving in the U.S. Army and the military, and because of the pandemic that's going on, it is totally expected that some votes would have been cast prior to November the 3rd, only to arrive late on November the 3rd or November the 4th. And just because of that pandemic doesn't mean that people will not have their voices heard. That's something that is outrageous as far as the Biden campaign are concerned. So they believe that this process will continue. They're hopeful that by the end of it, not only will they come out victorious, but that Biden will have demonstrated his respect for the democratic process as opposed to what they have described as Trump's contempt for the democratic process.
That's Jamal El-Shayal live for us in Wilmington, Delaware. That's Joe Biden's home state. Let's go to Aaron Call. He's a political commentator and the director of debate at the University of Michigan. He's joining us live by Skype from Novi, Michigan. It's good to have you with us on Al Jazeera. Which way do you think this is going to go?
Well, it's great to be back with you. Yes, as of now, Joe Biden would be considered the prohibitive favorite once votes are counted in places like Pennsylvania and Arizona and Nevada. He's likely in Georgia as well. He's likely to emerge with more than 270 electoral votes, and he could get close to that 300 line where President Trump was just 4 years ago.
Donald Trump and the Trump campaign are obviously talking a lot about litigation. How realistic is it to bring legal action at this stage, and would that make a significant difference to the end result?
Mm-hmm. I think the threat of litigation is legitimate, but its impact and effect on the outcome is negligible. The campaign's in court today about trying to get ballots discounted that arrived after the election deadline, but previous states, North Carolina, Pennsylvania, and others have already said that they would accept them as long as they were postmarked by election date, even if they were received a little bit late. And those have been litigated already to the Supreme Court, even before today, who decided that, yes, those state laws should be able to accept those ballots. And so I'm sure the campaigns will be in court for the next several days or weeks, and a lot of money will be raised about this. But in the end, because the margins in these key states are going to be in the tens of thousands or even hundreds of thousands, there are not going to be enough votes to be able to invalidate to have a large impact on that eventual outcome.
As we were mentioning earlier, Donald Trump has tweeted out, stop the count with an exclamation mark and in capitals. We're now seeing apparently there is some sort of statement coming out from Philadelphia from the Trump campaign. How are you reading the tone of what's coming from the Trump campaign at the moment?
Yeah, I mean, it's ultimately frustration. I mean, President Trump declared for re-election basically the day of his inauguration, and so he's been running for 4 years. This is ultimately, a close election decided by a few states. The United States is very politically divided, and so when you put your heart and soul in a campaign like this, and are the first incumbent president to lose in several decades, it's frustrating. And you also have a base of supporters that turned out for you, and he's going to end up with over 60 million or so votes. And so you want to show them that you are still fighting to the very end and throw some red meat their way. But ultimately, it's a lot of bluster on Twitter and things like that and complaints, but it's not likely going to have a major impact. But who knows, if President Trump doesn't win this time, he may announce that he's going to run for re-election in 2024. And so there'll be a campaign for the next 4 years. So a lot of this just could be a prelude to fighting for the future.
Let me just ask you a couple of speculative questions about what America is going to look like under Biden and what America could look like under Trump.
Yeah, certainly different in contrast. I mean, with Joe Biden, you'd have, an administration and a foreign policy much more similar to the Obama-Biden administration from those 8 years. But one thing that will be difficult for Joe Biden is that even if he ends up victorious, the Republicans are likely to still control the Senate, although it's possible it could be a tie after Georgia runoffs. And the Republicans also picked up seats in the House. And so it's going to be difficult for Joe Biden to govern. Many of his appointments and judges will have difficulty getting confirmed in the Senate. The House is going to be, more conservative this time than last. And so passing of legislation, overcoming filibuster and things like that, he'll have to govern a lot by executive order. And when President Obama and Biden came in 2008, they had control of all branches of government. So it's going to be like the Obama presidency, but there's going to need to be a lot more compromise, and it's going to be a lot more politically moderate just because the country's so divided, and there's clearly no mandate, even if Joe Biden does win the presidency eventually.
Yeah, and if he does get the presidency, but the Senate is in control of the Republicans, does that essentially stymie anything that Biden might be able to achieve?
It may. So at the conclusion of this, it's, the Senate ultimately could be tied with 2 runoffs in January determining it. So the best case scenario for the Democrats is that they win both, and then it'd be 50-50, and Vice President Kamala Harris would break the tiebreaker. But even if the Republicans win just one of those, that it would be in Republican hands. And yes, it can stymie the agenda because Mitch McConnell, being the Senate Majority Leader, decides anything that gets voted on, and that includes cabinet appointments and judicial appointments and any legislation. I mean, normally you need 60 votes, but even to get, to 50 is going to be a big hurdle, and many of those Democrats will be moderate as well. And so, yes, just like President Trump, you may see executive orders on things like immigration and other things like that, and not a very liberal cabinet, no Elizabeth Warren or Bernie Sanders. And so it's definitely going to be much more moderate. But if anyone's ready for that and has the background is Joe Biden, the fact that he was in the Senate, did a lot of compromises when he was vice president. And so if there's one person that would have to deal with those obstacles, he's in a good place to do it.
Aaron Cole, it's good to get your thoughts on this. Thank you very much indeed for joining us on Al Jazeera.
Of course, anytime.
Plenty more ahead on the NewsHour, including the UN's calling for an immediate de-escalation in tensions as Ethiopia's Prime Minister sends troops into the Tigray region. The UK gets a new multi-billion-dollar rescue package to boost its economy as England enters another pandemic lockdown. And in sport, doctors say Argentinian football legend Diego Maradona is recovering well after brain surgery. Sana's going to be here with that story. Well, as the results hang in the balance, there have been protests in cities across the U.S. In Arizona, armed Trump supporters gathered outside a vote counting center. Police blocked the entrance to the building. Observers from both parties were inside as the votes were being counted. There were also demonstrations in Las Vegas. Vote counting is still underway in Nevada. That's where Joe Biden has a very narrow lead over Donald Trump. And protests were held in Washington, D.C., near the White House. Demonstrators marched demanding that every vote is counted. Some activists carried signs reading, "The world is watching." And hundreds have marched through central Chicago, again calling for all votes to be included. They also highlighted issues that flared up during Trump's presidency, including police brutality, racism, and his handling of the coronavirus pandemic. Well, those issues were also highlighted at protests in New York. Gabriel Elizondo was there.
Protests on the streets of New York City. Here in the heart of Times Square, these people are protesting what they say is voter suppression in America against black people. This is just one of multiple protests that were in New York City. Earlier in the evening, thousands of people took to the streets in Midtown. They walked more than 30 blocks and they were chanting, "Count every ballot. Every vote counts." They were people that really showed some anger that the election was even being called into question by the president. And they said that they had to get out to the streets because they felt it was their civic duty to make their voices heard, that all the votes of everybody are counted.
Call people into the streets, call strikes, call action, shut this place down. I'm here because I want to join my voice to the thousands of others demanding that every vote be counted by law. It's a democracy, and everybody should have a voice.
I'm out here today for all the people who've mailed in their ballots and are wondering whether they're going to be counted. We know New York is going for Biden, but we don't know whether the voters in the swing states will be counted if Trump has his way. And we've learned that the only way to stop an attempted coup, like the one Trump is suggesting he would like to have now, is by having lots of people out in the streets peacefully demanding our rights.
Protesters here say they're
Okay, you're watching Al Jazeera. Members of Donald Trump's campaign are holding a news conference now in Philadelphia. Let's listen in. This is Pam Bondi.
They had a guy in there wearing a badge who is not a sworn law enforcement officer, keeping people away. This Secretary of State or Supervisor of Elections, the U.S. Constitution and under the U.S. Constitution, the legislature has the right to these laws which they have made, and a judge just confirmed that they must be followed. So we plan on that building right now and legally observing the voting process. Because if the legislature has the right to make these laws which they have made, and a judge just confirmed that they must be followed. That building right now and legally observing the voting process. Because if there's one illegal vote, great men and women of Pennsylvania who came out and issued a legal vote. So thank you very much. Corey Lewandowski.
Listen, guys, democracy dies in darkness. This is the opportunity to shed light on what's going on inside this building. Our observers are going to be 6 feet behind every person who's counting these votes in accordance with the COVID protocols. This is a win for every person who's cast a legal ballot in the state of Pennsylvania. We're going to go in here right now. We're going to start watching what's going on, not from 30 feet away, not from 100 feet away, from 6 feet away. This is a win, and what you will see is the Democrats are going to try and stop this from happening. They're going to appeal this decision because they don't want the American people to know what's going on in here. It's time to go in and put some light on what's happening. Thanks for being here, guys.
Whether you're a Democrat or a Republican, all these folks across the street, you should be allowed to observe and know what's happening with our voting process. That's why this is so important for all parties involved. Thank you. We're going to get our people through.
You'll be watching a press conference being held by Pam Bondi and Corey Lewandowski of the Trump campaign outside what appears to be the Philadelphia Convention Center. I'll have to check that to make sure. It is a place where votes are being counted. They're demanding access, saying that Democrats will attempt to stop them. I want to bring in Alan Fisher, who is talking to us from Washington about the overall picture in this. Alan, what do you make of this attempt to try to gain access to this counting, these ballot boxes and the counts that are going on in Philadelphia at the moment?
I think the Trump campaign overpromised and underdelivered. We've heard for the last half hour that they had a big legal announcement to make a big win in Pennsylvania, and now are being told that they're being allowed to go into to watch the vote count in what they describe as a corrupt place known for shenanigans. The fact that they're able to go in and watch the voting isn't a surprise. Already people from the Republican Party will be in that hall watching the voting. There are also people from the Democratic Party and their independent observers. I'm sure the people in Pennsylvania have got no problem with this because, as the Pennsylvanian Secretary of State has said on several occasions, they are following the applicable laws. They are doing everything by the book. There is nothing untoward. This idea that somehow ballots are being produced from nowhere and suddenly added to the total, they said simply isn't happening. Just in the last couple of hours, we've heard from senior Republicans saying that in Michigan, 40,000 ballots were discovered and they were added to the total. Just to confirm from the authorities in Detroit, nothing like that has happened. In fact, there are somewhere in the region of 200 disputed ballots. That would be in the ballot form. It's not entirely clear who they voted for. They will go to representatives of both parties and say, take a look at this. You think that's definitely a vote for Donald Trump? If both sides agree, it goes into the Donald Trump pile, and more often than not, they do. But the idea that the Trump campaign was building this up to be some big legal victory, and what has been approved by the courts is that they've gone to the courts and said, we want to get into the room of people from the campaign so we can watch what's happening with the ballots. And the court has said, you want to watch what's happening with the ballots? Yeah, okay, go ahead. It doesn't seem to be the big victory. And we're going to get this over the next few days. They're going to talk about big wins, how this is important, because, of course, on election night, Donald Trump talked about how there was this huge fraud that was being committed. Everyone says that this is being conducted by the book. And, of course, as we were saying earlier, Rob, Donald Trump tweeted out this morning for the first time today that they should stop the count, when his campaign are also saying they want to count all the ballots in Nevada, stop the count in Pennsylvania. The laws are there. If you voted and you have a ballot form that was stamped on the day of the election, you have in very different states, different timescales to get that vote in, and that vote must be counted because that is a legally cast vote. So there's going to be a lot of these, to use the Trump campaign's own words, shenanigans over the next few days legally, but every state is saying, look, we're following the rule book, we're doing everything by the book, and if you want to come and see and the court says, come and see, they're happy to do that.
Alan, thank you very much indeed. That's Alan Fisher talking to us from Washington, D.C. I want to speak to Joe Watkins. He's a Republican strategist, and he's a former White House aide under President George H.W. Bush. He's joining us from Philadelphia in Pennsylvania by Skype. It's good to have you with us back on Al Jazeera. Thank you very much indeed for joining us.
Glad to be with you.
Given the fact that you were an aide with President George H.W. Bush, how would you compare his campaigning with what we're seeing from the Trump administration now?
Very different, like night and day. George H.W. Bush was a very thoughtful person, and he was a hard campaigner, like most candidates for president are, but he was willing to, of course, concede once he knew that he had lost the campaign to Bill Clinton back in 1992. He won, of course, in 1988. He beat Michael Dukakis, and that was a happy moment for him and for all of us who worked on his campaign. But just as it was a sad moment when he lost in 1992 and had to admit defeat. But in so doing, he congratulated President-elect Bill Clinton, and then went about welcoming him to the White House. He invited him to come, he and Mrs. Clinton, to come to the White House. And met with him there and helped him prepare for his new administration, and even left a note for him in his desk so that when the new president, Bill Clinton, took over in the Oval Office, he had a personal handwritten note from George H.W. Bush wishing him good luck. And that was the kind of president that George H.W. Bush was.
Given everything that you said, how do you feel as a Republican about the way that the Trump administration and Donald Trump has been handling this process?
I think that any American, whether they're a Democrat or Republican, ought to allow the will of the American people to speak, and it speaks at the ballot box with votes. And whichever way it goes, we're supposed to honor that. And I think that the best thing that President Trump could do is honor the will of the American people as these votes come in. Let the votes come in. Everybody who has cast a ballot, whether by mail or in person, has a right to have their vote counted. And once those votes are counted and we know what the vote totals say and who's won the Electoral College, I think the president at that point ought to make a statement. And if he comes up short, he ought to congratulate Joe Biden on being the president-elect and wish him well and do everything he can for a peaceful transition of administrations. That's what every president ought to do. If Donald Trump wins, he ought to congratulate his opponent, Joe Biden, and then continue on with his administration and prepare for a second term. But whichever way it goes, he ought to certainly honor the wishes of the American people. And whatever those votes say is where we should be headed as a country. So I'm waiting like everybody else to see whether or not who Pennsylvania is going to be for. We should know in another day or two. Likewise, we'll know soon about Georgia and likely Arizona and Nevada. Those are all important states right now. And as soon as we know what the vote tallies are in those states and who's won them, then we'll know who the next president's going to be.
Let me ask you, again, as a Republican, how concerned are you about the future of the Republican Party? Has it been split into Trumpism and Republicanism?
I think that the Republican Party will get back up on its feet. Parties win and they lose. Candidates come and they go. And clearly, if the Republicans lose, they will have lost the White House. They will have continued to have lost for a second election the House of Representatives. It looks like Republicans have a chance to retain the majority in the Senate, but that means that there's going to be a lot of rebuilding, and the party will have to rebuild. It'll have to certainly look to the 2022 cycle and the 2024 cycle and consider its candidates and consider its message and how it appeals to voters and what it needs to have a winning message with a diverse group of supporters and go from there. I think that'll happen. I think you'll see the Republican Party come together and study where mistakes were made and what can be done better and where the party should be headed as we head into 2022.
We do have to make it clear, of course, that the race is not yet over for Donald Trump. He still has a route to the White House, although it may be pretty difficult. If Trump does get back in, if we do have another 4 years of President Trump, again, how concerned are you for the party under that Trump administration, and how concerned are you for America?
Well, I just want America to be a place where people care about each other and care about each other enough to love each other, even if they don't agree on political issues. I think that can be done. I think we can love our neighbor like we love ourselves, and I think that's completely possible to do. And it's going to take some work. Even if President Trump is retained for a second term, we're going to need to work on that as a country. And if Joe Biden is the new president, we're going to have to also work on that as a country, coming together and learning to love each other despite some of our differences and figuring out a way that we move the country forward. So I think that's a challenge for every American. And I've got my own platform now at joewatkins.org where I'm trying to promote that. I'm trying to promote people caring about each other and loving each other despite their differences. I think that's where we need to be headed as a country. And I'm not worried. Every country has challenges. We've had challenges in the last several years, but I think we'll get past them. So we've got to keep our chin up and just care about each other and love each other despite our differences. I think
Joe, thank you very much indeed. Time, unfortunately, is against us, but as always, we appreciate you being here on Al Jazeera. Thank you very much.
Thanks so much.
Well, as you've heard, Pennsylvania is one of the critical battleground states which will decide the election. Here's Kamal Santamaria with more on why it matters.
Pennsylvania is famously Joe Biden's native state. You've probably heard him mention Scranton, Pennsylvania more than a few times. But it is important for anyone who wants to win the White House. Pennsylvania has 20 electoral college votes on offer, and the pollsters believe the Keystone State could in fact hold the key in deciding who wins this time around. A bit of history for you here. We go back to 1992, and for 6 straight presidential elections, it has backed the Democrats. Bill Clinton and Barack Obama, who won twice. John Kerry and Al Gore, who didn't. But Pennsylvania still became part of the so-called Democratic Blue Wall. But like so many things, all of that changed in 2016. Pennsylvania flipped red, only just, when Donald Trump beat Hillary Clinton by less than 1%. Now, we're going to bring up the 2016 electoral map to see who did well where. And you've got the Democrats down in the southeast. They did well there, the cities and the suburbs. The Republicans, who won in mostly rural areas, did pick up some urban centres. And then the three counties which we've coloured in orange, who switched from Barack Obama in 2 elections to Donald Trump in 2016. Quick look at some demographics for you, and more than 80% of Pennsylvania's voting population is white. Blue-collar voters who've long been the Democrats' base, non-college educated voters who favour Donald Trump. Also 10% of eligible voters are black and Hispanics a little over 5%. So it'll probably come down to those urban voters in Pennsylvania and whether Biden can hold on to them and then woo some back from Donald Trump to decide who gets 20 vital electoral college votes. And that is why Pennsylvania matters.
Many Chinese business owners expect relations with the U.S. to remain tense regardless of who ends up in the White House. With the trade war ongoing, China's President Xi Jinping has vowed to move its focus from exporting to strengthening the domestic economy. Katrina Yu has this report from Shanghai.
These custom-made coins, designed to commemorate events held by U.S. military and police veterans, are manufactured here in Andy Sun's factory in China's east. 90% of his customers are in the U.S., but the strained relationship between Washington and Beijing is forcing him to look elsewhere.
I never expected that China-U.S. relations would become this bad. Deep in my heart, I love American culture. I admire their military power and history. But America is like a jealous stepsister, looking to strike down any good-looking sisters.
The view of the U.S. as a rival, rather than a reliable partner, is shared by China's leaders. At the opening of Shanghai's International Import Expo on Wednesday, President Xi Jinping invited other countries to invest in China and said Beijing was shifting its focus from exports to domestic consumption.
China is entering a new development period. To adapt to the new situation and requirements, we proposed a new pattern with domestic circulation as the mainstay.
A new development period spurred, say analysts, by the Trump administration's tough stance on China when it comes to trade and technology.
There was an acceleration in the technological decoupling in the past 3 years, started with the Huawei incident, and then we saw the trade war. It's quite effective of lowering the trade volume between China and the U.S.
Trump's ban on the sale of high-tech U.S. chips has crippled China's technology sector. In response, the Communist Party says it will turbocharge Chinese technological research and development over the next 15 years.
Regardless of who wins the U.S. election, China's path is clear. It wants other countries to become increasingly dependent on its fast-growing consumer market and aims to overtake the U.S. in the race to dominate advanced technologies.
With its coronavirus largely under control, China is the only G20 economy expected to grow this year. The country powers roughly 1/3 of global economic growth, a percentage set to increase over the next decade.
I just don't think it's a good idea to contain China. Probably a better way is to collaborating.
But it's a message Andy Sun believes will fall on deaf ears in Washington. He says he has little choice but to prepare for the U.S. and China to drift further apart. Katrina Yu, Al Jazeera, Shanghai.
In other news, Kosovo's president says he'll resign immediately to face a war crimes trial at The Hague. Hashim Thaçi was indicted in June by a special tribunal investigating the 1998-99 conflict with Serbia. Thaçi is accused of nearly 100 murders when he was a former commander of the Kosovo Liberation Army Group.
As I promised, I would not allow the President of the Republic of Kosovo to go to court. That is why, to protect the integrity of the presidency of Kosovo, of the state of Kosovo, and the people, and respecting the partnership with the international community, I am resigning from the post of the President of Kosovo.
Ethiopian lawmakers have backed a 6-month state of emergency in the northern Tigray region amid fighting between local forces and government soldiers. Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed sent troops there on Wednesday, accusing the province's ruling TPLF party of an attack on federal troops. Existing tensions grew in September after the TPLF held regional elections despite a government postponement due to COVID-19. Tigray's rulers say the move was a power grab by the Prime Minister. The UN has called for de-escalation. Mohamed Addo says there are fears the crisis could upset the stability of the region.
This conflict has been long in the making. The Tigray People's Liberation Front, TPLF, which was the dominant party in the ruling coalition for almost 27 years, has been at loggerheads with Abiy ever since he came to power in November 2018. They accused him of cracking down on the leadership of the TPLF, targeting some with what they call trumped-up charges in court, and also what they called economic sabotage by his government by targeting businesses belonging to people who are from the Tigray community, which is about 6% of the population of Ethiopia. And when Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed tried to disband the ruling Ethiopian People's Revolutionary Democratic Front, which was made up of ethnical parties that are based on tribe, which of course the TPLF was the dominant one, the TPLF refused, and then its leadership retired to Mekelle, which is the capital of the Tigray region, and then organized those elections that heightened the tensions that we are seeing. So yes, there is a real fear of a civil war in Ethiopia. We could see a massive influx of refugees into neighboring countries, and it could upset the relative stability that the Horn of Africa is currently enjoying. And if we look at the history, this has been a really unstable region for a very long time.
A new nationwide lockdowns come into effect in England as it struggles to curb a second wave of coronavirus. Prime Minister Boris Johnson says it'll be lifted automatically in the next 4 weeks. Last night, large crowds were seen gathered in London with very little social distancing. Scotland, Wales and Northern Ireland have their own restrictions in place. Niamh Barker's in London with more.
There is a very different atmosphere to this second lockdown. The streets in central London are reasonably busy and there are people out and about. Perhaps this time round, people are less afraid of the unknown. And many workplaces, of course, have adapted to these changing times, meaning that people are still going out to their offices. Also, schools, universities and nurseries remain open. The streets were busy during the school run this morning. But there are big concerns about the retail and hospitality sector. And we're on the Strand in central London. Many shops here are closed. There's also been an announcement of 3,500 job cuts in one of the big supermarkets, Sainsbury's, and its associated brand Argos. Of course, there had been concerns about the high street even before the pandemic, deep concerns about what kind of lasting impact this second lockdown would have. And for some stores, the first lockdown was already too much, forced to close their doors then. Concerns there could well be casualties this second time around. The government, though, says that there is support available. The furlough scheme that pays 80% of the salaries of workers temporarily will be extended. And also the Bank of England has announced that it's injecting $195 billion into the economy. But worries, of course, about how long the government can continue insulating the economy in these unpredictable and changing times.
Well, the US says it's deeply concerned over the arrest of a prominent journalist in Hong Kong. It's accused Beijing of crushing press freedom in the city. Choi Yak-ling, who also goes by the name Bao Choi, was taken into custody for traffic violations, but activists fear that isn't the real reason behind her arrest. Sarah Clark reports from Hong Kong.
Bao Choi is facing charges for her role in a TV documentary series investigating police misconduct during last year's anti-government protests. Police accuse her of making false statements to access personal information while carrying out research. Media unions have condemned the government's action.
I think it's very ridiculous and deplorable that it happened in Hong Kong. I think journalists never expect that such kind of case, such ridiculous and sad case will happen that soon.
The The investigative report examined accusations of a delayed response by officers to an attack by a group on protesters at a train station in July last year. Police were accused of colluding with the gang. Choi used a government database to trace and identify the owners of the cars that the attackers travelled in. Police say that information was obtained illegally. Media union groups say Bao Choi was just doing her job.
What we're talking here is not a special privilege for journalists because we're talking about accessing public records. By nature, this information in the public domain and it can be accessed by anyone in the public.
The arrest of that reporter could happen to all of us. The government changed the process and this was a trap. This is part of a government action to suppress the media.
The government has rejected claims Choi's arrest was part of a media crackdown.
This is not a target on any specific industry. It is the case's circumstances which decide what is the subject of this investigation.
Since the national security laws were introduced in July, the Territory's Journalists Association says the rules have changed for the media. Critics warn that while these new laws mainly punish secession and foreign interference, they could be used to suppress dissent. The Hong Kong government has now launched a national security hotline to allow the public to inform them of those they believe have broken the law. Sarah Clark, Al Jazeera, Hong Kong.
Still ahead in sport.
I decline to comment on such a thing.
Manchester United's manager is facing some awkward questions about his future. Sarah's here with that story. Time for the sport. Here's Sana.
Thank you very much, Rob. Well, Manchester United boss Ole Gunnar Solskjaer is facing questions about his future and the job. It follows his side's shock defeat against Istanbul's Başakşehir in the Champions League. Well, United were beating 2-1 in Turkey. It's already been a tough season for the Red Devils. On top of this defeat, they're lost 3 times in the English Premier League and are down in 15th.
I decline to comment on such a thing. Of course, it's early on, and opinions are out there all the time. You've got to stay strong. I'm employed by the club to do a job, and I do that to the best of my ability with our staff.
Well, earlier we spoke to UK football writer John Cross. He believes that being a former United player is helping Solskjaer's cause.
I do think the pressure is mounting on Solskjaer. I think another defeat at Everton will really start people talking even more so. I just don't think you can lose at home to Arsenal, suffer that sort of defeat midweek in the Champions League and be manager of a club like Manchester United and expect not to have that very immediate threat. I think it's made worse probably for Solskjaer by the fact that Mauricio Pochettino, an obvious suitor for the job, is available. He's underlined how much he likes English football this week, and he's clearly the man in the background, ready to take charge. So I do think the pressure is certainly mounting. I still think that Solskjaer will probably, because United have put so much faith in him, he is a club legend, and I think he'll probably be afforded more time than perhaps if he wasn't that given that sort of status. But I do think the pressure is mounting.
Also on Wednesday in the Champions League, RB Leipzig upset PSG 2-1. The German side are level on points with United, who are still first in Group H despite their loss. Barcelona made it 3 wins from 3 and top Group G. Dortmund lead Group F after their win in Belgium. Sevilla also won and are level on points with Group E leaders Chelsea.
But we did the right things in the game in every aspect. We started well. We got our goals. We saw the game out well. Gave us a chance to get some minutes of players as well at the back end of the game. So I'm very pleased. We just have to keep going in the same vein as we are at the moment.
Well, Tottenham are looking to hit back from a shock defeat in the Europa League later on. Spurs suffered a 1-0 loss against Antwerp in their last match in Europe's second-tier competition. The result left them second in their group with 3 points from 2 matches.
Because of the defeat, the game becomes more important. Of course, there are still 12 points to play for, and we have already 3. But tomorrow is important that we that we win, or if you cannot win, at least if we get a point. So hopefully the players, they understand that the match tomorrow has to be different than it was at Antwerp, and from myself I have to motivate them in a different way.
Well, in Major League Soccer, the LA Galaxy's hopes of reaching the playoffs have been ended. They needed a win against Seattle Sounders, and it looked like that could happen when Javier Hernandez put the Galaxy 1-0 up. But Seattle equalized in injury time. It means the 5-time MLS champions will miss the postseason for the 3rd time in 4 years. Diego Maradona is said to be cracking jokes and making good progress following brain surgery. The 60-year-old is recovering in Buenos Aires hospital, where dozens of fans have gathered awaiting news of his condition. He underwent a procedure on Tuesday to remove a blood clot. Maradona led Argentina to World Cup glory in 1986.
He is aware of everything and in a very good mood. To be honest, we are amazed with his recovery, but that has happened before with Diego. But we must remain cautious because it is neurosurgery.
Rafael Nadal is about to start his latest match at the Paris Masters. He's playing Jordan Thompson of Australia. On Wednesday, Nadal secured his 1,000th career victory. Already through to the last 8 in France is 6th seed Diego Schwartzman. The Argentinian dropped just 2 games in a straight sets win against Spain's Alejandro Davidovich Fokina. And that's all sport for me. We'll have more for you later on, but for now I hand you back to Rob.
Sana, thank you very much indeed, and that's it from me, Rob Matheson, for this News Hour. I'm going to be back in a moment with more of the day's news, including the race to the White House, which is going down to the wire. Join me in a bit. Bye-bye.